Don't forget to subscribe. Afterwards, the wisest and most spiritual books from the greatest authors await you every day. And now buckle up, sit back and we'll begin. Carlos Castaneda. Book 6. Eagle's Gift. Quasi-memories of the other self. Can you tell us what's going on? Nestor asked me when all of us were together at night. Where did you two go yesterday? I had forgotten Lagorda's recommendation that we not talk about what had happened to us. I began to tell them that we had gone first to the nearby town, and we had found a most intriguing house there. All of them seemed to have been touched by a sudden tremor. They perked up, looked at one another, and then they stared at Lagorda, as if waiting for her to tell them about it. What kind of a house was it? Nestor asked. Before I had time to answer, Lagorda interrupted me. She began to talk in a hurried, almost incoherent manner. It was evident to me that she was improvising. She even used words and phrases in the Mazatec language. She gave me furtive glances that spelled out a silent plea not to say anything about it. How about your dreaming, Nagual? She asked me with the relief of someone who has found the way out. We'd like to know everything you do. I think it's very important that you tell us. She leaned over and as casually as she could she whispered in my ear that because of what had happened to us in Oaxaca, I had to tell them about my dreaming. Why would it be important to you? I said loudly. I think we are very close to the end, Lagorda said solemnly. Everything you say or do to us is of key importance now. I related to them the events of what I considered my true dreaming. Don Juan had told me that there was no point in emphasizing the trials. He gave me a rule of thumb. If I should have the same vision 3 times, he said, I had to pay extraordinary attention to it. Otherwise, a neophyte and new participant in some activity attempts were merely a stepping stone to building the second attention. I dreamed once that I woke up and jumped out of bed only to be confronted by myself still sleeping in bed. I watched myself asleep and had the self-control to remember that I was dreaming. I followed then the directions Don Juan had given me, which were to avoid sudden jolts or surprises, and to take everything with a grain of salt. The dreamer has to get involved, Don Juan had said, in dispassionate experimentations. Rather than examining his sleeping body, the dreamer walks out of the room. I suddenly found myself, without knowing how, outside my room. I had the absolutely clear sensation that I had been placed there instantaneously. When I first stood outside my door, the hall and the staircase were monumental. If anything really scared me that night, it was the size of those structures which in real life were thoroughly commonplace. The hall was about 50 feet long, and the staircase had 16 steps. I could not conceive how to cover the enormous distances I was perceiving. I vacillate, be undecided about something, waver between conflicting positions or courses of action, then something made me move. I did not walk, though. I did not feel my steps. Suddenly I was holding onto the railing. I could see my hands and forearms, but I did not feel them. I was holding on by the force of something that had nothing to do with my musculature as I know it. The same thing happened when I tried to go down the stairs. I did not know how to walk. I just could not take a step. It was as if my legs were welded together. I could see my legs by leaning over, but I could not move them forward or laterally, nor could I lift them up toward my chest. I seemed to be stuck to the top step. I felt I was like those inflated plastic dolls that can lean in any direction until they are horizontal, only to be pulled upright again by the weight of their heavy rounded bases. I made a supreme effort to walk and bounced from step to step like a clumsy ball. It took an incredible degree of attention to get to the ground floor. I could not describe it in any other way. Some form of attentiveness was required to maintain the bounds of my vision, to prevent it from disintegrating into the fleeting images of an ordinary dream. When I finally got to the street door, I could not open it. I tried desperately, but to no avail. Then I recalled that I had gotten out of my room by gliding out of it as if the door had been open. All I needed was to recall that feeling of gliding, and suddenly I was out in the street. It looked dark, a peculiarly lead gray darkness that did not permit me to perceive any colors. My interest was drawn immediately to an enormous lagoon of brightness right in front of me at my eye level. I deduced rather than perceived that it was the street light, since I knew there was one right on the corner 20 feet above the ground. I knew then that I could not make the perceptual arrangements needed in order to judge up, or down, or here, or there. Everything seemed to be extraordinarily present. I had no mechanism, as in ordinary life, to arrange my perception. Everything was there in the foreground, and I had no volition to construct an adequate screening procedure. I stayed in the street, bewildered, until I began to have the sensation that I was levitating. I held on to the metal pole that supported the light and the street sign on the corner. A strong breeze was lifting me up. I was sliding up the pole until I could plainly see the name of the street, Ashton. Months later, when I again found myself in a dream looking at my sleeping body, I already had a repertoire, the entire range of skills or devices used in a particular activity of things to do. In the course of my regular dreaming, I had learned that what matters in that state was volition. Volition, the capability of conscious choice and decision, and intention, the corporeality, the quality of being physical, consisting of matter of the body, has no significance. It is simply a memory that slows down the dreamer. I glided out of the room without hesitation, since I did not have to act out the motions of opening a door or walking in order to move. The hall and staircase were not as enormous as they appeared to be the first time. I glided through with great ease and ended up in the street, where I willed myself to move 3 blocks. I became aware then that the lights were still very disturbing sights. If I focused my attention on them, they became pools of immeasurable size. The other elements of that dream were easy to control. The buildings were extraordinarily large, but their features were familiar. I pondered what to do. And then, quite casually, I realized that if I did not stare at things, but only glanced at them just as we do in our daily world, I could arrange my perception. In other words, if I followed Don Juan's suggestions to the letter, and took my dreaming for granted, I could use the perceptual biases of my everyday life. After a few moments, the scenery became, if not completely familiar, controllable. The next time I had a similar dream, I went to my favorite coffee shop on the corner. The reason I selected it was because I was used to going there all the time in the very early hours of the morning. In my dreaming, I saw the usual waitresses who worked the graveyard shift. I saw a row of people eating at the counter, and right at the very end of the counter I saw a peculiar character. A man I saw nearly every day walking aimlessly around the UCLA campus. He was the only person who actually looked at me. The instant I came in, he seemed to sense me. He turned around and stared at me. I found the same man in my waking hours a few days later in the same coffee shop in the early hours of the morning. He took one look at me and seemed to recognize me. He looked horrified and ran away without giving me a chance to talk to him. While dreaming, I came back once more to the same coffee shop, and that was when the course of my dreaming changed. As I was watching the restaurant from across the street, the scene altered. I could not see the familiar buildings anymore. Instead, I saw primeval scenery. It was no longer night. It was bright daylight, and I was looking at a lush valley. Swampy, deep green, reed-like plants grew all over. Next to me there was a rock ledge 8 to 10 feet high. A huge saber-toothed tiger was sitting there. I was petrified. We looked at each other fixedly for a long time. The size of that beast was striking, yet it was not grotesque or out of proportion. It had a splendid head, big eyes the color of dark honey, massive paws, and an enormous rib cage. What impressed me the most was the color of its fur. It was uniformly dark brown, almost chocolate. Its color reminded me of roasted coffee beans, only lustrous. It had strangely longish fur, not matted or ratty. It did not look like a puma's fur, or a wolf's, or a polar bear's either. It looked like something I had never seen before. From that time on, it became routine for me to see the tiger. At times the scenery was cloudy and chilly. I could see rain in the valley, thick copious rain. At other times the valley was bathed in sunlight. Quite often I would see other saber-toothed tigers in the valley. I could hear their unique squeaking roar, a most nauseating sound to me. The tiger never touched me. We stared at each other from 10 to 12 feet away. Yet I could tell what he wanted. He was showing me how to breathe in a specific manner. It got to the point in my dreaming where I could imitate the tiger's breathing so well that I felt I was turning into one. I told the apprentices that a tangible result of my dreaming was that my body became more muscular. After listening to my account, Nestor marveled at how different their dreaming was from mine. They had particular dreaming tasks. His was to find cures for anything that ailed the human body. Benigno's task was to predict, foresee, or find a solution for anything that was of human concern. Pablito's task was to find ways to build. Nestor said that those tasks were the reason why he dealt with medicinal plants. Benigno had an oracle, and Pablito was a carpenter. He added that, so far, they had only scratched the surface of their dreaming, and that they had nothing of substance to report. You may think that we've done a great deal, he went on, but we haven't. Gennaro and the Nagual did everything for us and for these 4 women. We've done nothing on our own yet. It seems to me that the Nagual set you up differently, Benigno said, speaking very slowly and deliberately. You must have been a tiger, and you are definitely going to turn into one again. That's what happened to the Nagual. He had been a crow already, and while in this life he turned into one again. The problem is that that kind of tiger doesn't exist anymore, Nestor said. We never heard what happens in that case. He swept his head around to include all of them with his gesture. I know what happens, Lagorta said. I remember that the Nagual Juan made us called that ghost dreaming. He said that none of us has ever done ghost dreaming because we are not violent or destructive. He never did it himself. And he said that whoever does it is marked by fate to have ghost helpers and allies. What does that mean, Gorda? I asked. It means that you're not like us, she replied somberly. Gorda seemed to be very agitated. She stood up and paced up and down the room 4 or 5 times before she sat down again by my side. There was a gap of silence in the conversation. Josefina mumbled something unintelligible. She also seemed to be very nervous. Gorda tried to calm her down, hugging her and patting her back. Josefina has something to tell you about Eligio, Gorda said to me. Everyone looked at Josefina without saying a word, a question in their eyes. In spite of the fact that Eligio has disappeared from the face of the earth, Gorda went on, he is still one of us. And Josefina talks to him all the time. The rest of them suddenly became attentive. They looked at one another and then they looked at me. They meet in dreaming, Gorda said dramatically. Josefina took a deep breath. She seemed to be the epitome, a standard or typical example of nervousness. Her body shook convulsively. Pablito lay on top of her on the floor and began breathing hard with his diaphragm, pushing it in and out, forcing her to breathe in unison with him. What's he doing? I asked Gorda. What's he doing? Can't you see? She replied sharply. I whispered to her that I was aware that he was trying to make her relax, but that his procedure was novel to me. She said that Pablito was giving Josefina energy by placing his midsection, where men have a surplus of it, over Josefina's womb, where women store their energy. Josefina sat up and smiled at me. She seemed to be perfectly relaxed. I do meet Eligio all the time, she said. He waits for me every day. How come you've never told us that? Pablito asked in a huffy tone. She told me, Gorda interrupted, and then she went into a lengthy explanation of what it meant to all of us that Eligio was available. She added that she had been waiting for a sign from me to disclose Eligio's words. Don't beat around the bush, woman. Pablito yelled. Tell us his words. They are not for you. Gorda yelled back. Who are they for, then? Pablito asked. They are for the Nagual, Gorda yelled, pointing at me. Gorda apologized for raising her voice. She said that whatever Eligio had said was complex and mysterious, and she could not make heads or tails of it. I just listened to him. That's all I was able to do, listen to him, Gorda continued. Do you mean you also meet Eligio? Pablito asked in a tone that was a mixture of anger and expectation. I do, Gorda replied in almost a whisper. I couldn't talk about it because I had to wait for him. She pointed to me and then pushed me with both hands. I momentarily lost my balance and tumbled down on my side. What is this? What are you doing to him? Pablito asked in a very angry voice. Was that a display of Indian love? I turned to Gorda. She made a gesture with her lips to tell me to be quiet. Eligio says that you are the Nagual, but you are not for us, Josefina said to me. There was dead silence in the room. I did not know what to make of Josefina's statement. I had to wait until someone else talked. Do you feel relieved? Gorda prodded me. I said to all of them that I did not have any opinions one way or the other. They looked like children, bewildered children. Gorda had the air of a mistress of ceremonies who is thoroughly embarrassed. Nestor stood up and faced Gorda. He spoke a phrase in Mazatec to her. It had the sound of a command or a reproach. Tell us everything you know, Gorda, he went on in Spanish. You have no right to play with us, To hold back something so important, just for yourself. Lagorda protested vehemently. She explained that she was holding on to what she knew because Eligio had asked her to do so. Josefina assented with a nod of her head. Did he tell all this to you or to Josefina? Pablito asked. We were together, Lagorda said in a barely audible whisper. You mean you and Josefina dreamed together? Pablito exclaimed breathlessly. The surprise in his voice corresponded to the shock wave that seemed to go through the rest of them. What exactly has Eligio said to you two? Nestor asked when the shock had subsided. He said that I should try to help the Nagual remember his left side, Lagorda said. Do you know what she's talking about? Nestor asked me. There was no possibility that I would have known. I told them that they should turn to themselves for answers. But none of them voiced any suggestions. He told Josefina other things which she can't remember, Lagorda said. So we are in a real fix. Eligio said that you are definitely the Nagual and you have to help us, but that you are not for us. Only upon remembering your left side can you take us to where we have to go. Nestor spoke to Josefina in a fatherly manner and urged her to remember what Eligio had said. Nestor did that rather than insisting that I should remember something which must have been in some sort of code, since none of us could make sense of it. Josefina winced and frowned as if she were under a heavy weight that was pushing her down. She actually looked like a rag doll that was being compressed. I watched in true fascination. I can't, she finally said. I know what he's talking about when he speaks to me, but I can't say now what it is. It doesn't come out. Do you remember any words? Nestor asked. Any single words? She stuck her tongue out, shook her head from side to side, and screamed at the same time. No. I can't, she said after a moment. What kind of dreaming do you do, Josefina? I asked. The only kind I know, she snapped. I've told you how I do mine, I said. Now tell me how you do yours. I close my eyes and I see this wall, she said. It's like a wall of fog. Eligio waits for me there. He takes me through it and shows me things, I suppose. I don't know what we do, but we do things together. Then he brings me back to the wall and lets me go, and I come back and forget what I've seen. How did you happen to go with Lagorda? I asked. Eligio told me to get her, she said. The two of us waited for Lagorda, and when she went into her dreaming we snatched her and pulled her behind that wall. We've done that twice. How did you snatch her? I asked. I don't know. Josefina replied. But I'll wait for you and when you do your dreaming, I'll snatch you and then you'll know. Can you snatch anyone? I asked. Sure, she said, smiling. But I don't do it because it's a waste. I snatched Lagorda because Eligio told me that he wanted to tell her something on account of her being more level-headed than I am. Then Eligio must have told you the same things, Gorda, Nestor said with a firmness that was not familiar to me. Lagorda made an unusual gesture of lowering her head, opening her mouth on the sides, shrugging her shoulders, and lifting her arms above her head. Josefina has just told you what happened, she said. There is no way for me to remember. Eligio speaks with a different speed. He speaks but my body cannot understand him. No. My body cannot remember. That's what it is. I know he said that the Nagual here will remember and will take us to where we have to go. He couldn't tell me more because there was so much to tell and so little time. He said that somebody, and I don't remember who, is waiting for me in particular. Is that all he said? Nestor insisted. The second time I saw him, he told me that all of us will have to remember our left side, sooner or later, if we want to get to where we have to go. But he is the one who has to remember first. She pointed to me and pushed me again as she had done earlier. The force of her shove sent me tumbling like a ball. What are you doing this for, Gorda? I asked, a bit annoyed at her. I'm trying to help you remember, she said. The Don Juan maid told me that I should give you a push from time to time, in order to jolt you. Gorda hugged me in a very abrupt movement. Help us, Nagwal, she pleaded. We are worse off than dead if you don't. I was close to tears. Not because of their dilemma, but because I felt something stirring inside me. It was something that had been edging its way out ever since we visited that town. Gorda's pleading was heartbreaking. I then had another attack of what seemed to be hyperventilation. A cold sweat enveloped me, and then I got sick to my stomach. Gorda tended to me with absolute kindness. True to her practice of waiting before revealing a finding, Gorda would not consider discussing our seeing together in Oaxaca. For days she remained aloof and determinedly uninterested. She would not even discuss my getting ill. Neither would the other women. Don Juan used to stress the need for waiting for the most appropriate time to let go of something that we hold. I understood the mechanics of Gorda's actions, although I found her insistence on waiting rather annoying and not in accord with our needs. I could not stay with them too long, so I demanded that all of us should get together and share everything we knew. She was inflexible. We have to wait, she said. We have to give our bodies a chance to come up with a solution. Our task is the task of remembering, not with our minds but with our bodies. Everybody understands it like that. She looked at me inquisitively. She seemed to be looking for a clue that would tell her that I too had understood the task. I admitted to being thoroughly mystified. Since I was the outsider, I was alone while they had one another for support. This is the silence of warriors, she said, laughing, and then added in a conciliatory tone, this silence doesn't mean that we can't talk about something else. Maybe we should go back to our old discussion of losing the human form, I said. There was a look of annoyance in her eyes. I explained at length that, especially when foreign concepts were involved, meaning had to be continually clarified for me. What exactly do you want to know? She asked. Anything that you may want to tell me, I said. The Nagwal told me that losing the human form brings freedom, she said. I believe it. But I haven't felt that freedom, not yet. There was a moment of silence. She was obviously assessing my reaction. What kind of freedom is it, Gorda? I asked. The freedom to remember yourself, she said. The Nagwal said that losing the human form is like a spiral. It gives you the freedom to remember, and this in turn makes you even freer. Why haven't you felt that freedom yet? I asked. She clicked her tongue and shrugged her shoulders. She seemed confused or reluctant to go on with our conversation. I'm tied to you, she said. Until you lose your human form in order to remember, I won't be able to know what that freedom is. But perhaps you won't be able to lose your human form unless you remember first. We shouldn't be talking about this anyway. Why don't you go and talk to the Generos? She sounded like a mother sending her child out to play, But I did not mind it in the least. From someone else I could easily have taken the same attitude as arrogance or contempt. I liked being with her. That was the difference. I found Pablito, Nestor, and Benigno in Gennaro's house playing a strange game. Pablito was dangling about 4 feet above the ground inside something that seemed to be a dark leather harness strapped to his chest under his armpits. The harness resembled a thick leather vest. As I focused my attention on it, I noticed that Pablito was actually standing on some thick straps that looped down from the harness like stirrups. He was suspended in the center of the room by 2 ropes strung over a thick round transverse beam that supported the roof. Each rope was attached to the harness itself, over Pablito's shoulders, by a metal ring. Nestor and Benigno each held a rope. They were standing, facing each other, holding Pablito in mid-air by the strength of their pull. Pablito was holding on with all his strength to 2 long thin poles that were planted in the ground and fitted comfortably in his clasped hands. Nestor was to Pablito's left and Benigno to his right. The game seemed to be a 3-sided tug-of-war, a ferocious battle between the ones who were tugging and the one who was suspended. When I walked into the room, all I could hear was the heavy breathing of Nestor and Benigno. The muscles of their arms and necks were bulging with the strain of pulling. Pablito kept an eye on both of them, focusing on each one at a time with a split-second glance. All 3 were so absorbed in their game that they did not even notice my presence, or if they did, they could not afford to break their concentration to greet me. Nestor and Benigno stared at each other for 10 to 15 minutes in total silence. Then Nestor faked letting his rope go. Benigno did not fall for it, but Pablito did. Pablito tightened the grip of his left hand and braced his feet on the poles in order to strengthen his hold. Benigno used the moment to strike and gave a mighty tug at the precise instant that Pablito eased his grip. Benigno's pull caught Pablito and Nestor by surprise. Benigno hung from the rope with all his weight. Nestor was outmaneuvered. Pablito fought desperately to balance himself. It was useless. Benigno won the round. Pablito got out of the harness and came to where I was. I asked him about their extraordinary game. He seemed somehow reluctant to talk. Nestor and Benigno joined us after putting their gear away. Nestor said that their game had been designed by Pablito, who found the structure in dreaming and then constructed it as a game. At first it was a device for tensing the muscles of 2 of them at the same time. They used to take turns at being hoisted. But then Benigno's dreaming gave them the entry into a game where all 3 of them tensed their muscles and sharpened their visual prowess by remaining in a state of alertness, sometimes for hours. Benigno thinks now that it is helping our bodies to remember, Nestor went on. Lagorda, for instance, plays it in a weird way. She wins every time, no matter what position she plays. Benigno thinks that's because her body remembers. I asked them if they also had the silence rule. They laughed. Pablito said that Lagorda wanted more than anything else to be like the Nagual Juan made us. She deliberately imitated him up to the most absurd detail. Do you mean we can talk about what happened the other night? I asked, almost bewildered, since Lagorda had been so emphatically against it. We don't care, Pablito said. You're the Nagual. Benigno here remembered something real weird, Nestor said without looking at me. I think it was a mixed-up dream, myself, Benigno said, but Nestor thinks it wasn't. I waited impatiently. With a movement of my head, I urged them to go on. The other day he remembered you teaching him how to look for tracks in soft dirt, Nestor said. It must have been a dream, I said. I wanted to laugh at the absurdity, but all three of them looked at me with pleading eyes. It's absurd, I said. Anyway, I'd better tell you now that I have a similar recollection, Nestor said. You took me to some rocks and showed me how to hide. Mine was not a mixed-up dream. I was awake. I was walking with Benigno one day, looking for plants, and suddenly I remembered you teaching me. So I hid as you taught me, and scared Benigno out of his wits. I taught you. How could that be? When? I asked. I was beginning to get nervous. They did not seem to be joking. When? That's the point, Nestor said. We can't figure out when. But Benigno and I know it was you. I felt heavy, oppressed. My breathing became difficult. I feared I was going to get ill again. I decided right then to tell them about what Lagorda and I had seen together. Talking about it relaxed me. At the end of my recounting I was again in control of myself. The Nagual Juan made us left us a little bit open, Nestor said. All of us can see a little. We see holes in people who have had children, and also, from time to time, we see a little glow in people. Since you don't see it all, it looks like the Nagual left you completely closed, so that you will open yourself from within. Now you've helped Lagorda and she either sees from within or she's merely riding on your back. I told them that what had happened in Oaxaca may have been a fluke. Pablito thought that we should go to Gennaro's favorite rock and sit there with our heads together. The other two found his idea brilliant. I had no objections. Although we sat there for a long time, nothing happened. We did get very relaxed, however. While we were still sitting on the rock I told them about the two men Lagorda had believed to be Don Juan and Don Gennaro. They slid down and practically dragged me back to Lagorda's house. Nestor was the most agitated. He was almost incoherent. All I got out of them was that they had been waiting for a sign of that nature. Lagorda was waiting for us at the door. She knew what I had told them. I just wanted to give my body time, she said before we had said anything. I have to be dead sure, which I am. It was the Nagual and Gennaro. What's in those shacks? Nestor asked. They didn't go inside them, Lagorda said. They walked away toward the open fields, toward the east. In the direction of this town. She seemed bent on appeasing them. She asked them to stay. They did not want to. They excused themselves and left. I was sure that they felt ill at ease in her presence. She seemed to be very angry. I rather enjoyed her explosions of temper, and this was quite contrary to my normal reactions. I had always felt edgy in the presence of anyone who was upset, with the mysterious exception of Lagorda. During the early hours of the evening all of us congregated in Lagorda's room. All of them seemed preoccupied. They sat in silence, staring at the floor. Lagorda tried to start a conversation. She said that she had not been idle, that she had put two and two together, and had come up with some solutions. This is not a matter of putting two and two together, Nestor said. This is a task of remembering with the body. It seemed that they had talked about it among themselves, judging by the nods of agreement Nestor had from the others. That left Lagorda and myself as the outsiders. Lydia also remembers something, Nestor went on. She thought it was her stupidity, But upon hearing what I've remembered, she told us that this Nagwal here took her to a cure and left her there to have her eyes cured. Lagorda and I turned to Lydia. She lowered her head as if embarrassed. She mumbled. The memory seemed too painful for her. She said that when Don Juan first found her, her eyes were infected and she could not see. Someone drove her in a car over a great distance to the curer who healed her. She had always been convinced that Don Juan had done that, but upon hearing my voice she realized that it was I who had taken her there. The incongruity of such a memory threw her into agony from the first day she met me. My ears don't lie to me, Lydia added after a long silence. It was you who took me there. Impossible. Impossible. I yelled. My body began to shake, out of control. I had a sense of duality. Perhaps what I call my rational self, incapable of controlling the rest of me, took the seat of a spectator. Some part of me was watching as another part of me shook. Crossing the boundaries of affection. What's happening to us, Gorda? I asked after the others had gone home. Our bodies are remembering, but I just can't figure out what, she said. Do you believe the memories of Lydia, Nestor, and Benigno? Sure. They're very serious people. They don't just say things like that for the hell of it. But what they say is impossible. You believe me, don't you, Gorda? I believe that you don't remember, but then she did not finish. She came to my side and began to whisper in my ear. She said that there was something that the Nagwal Juan Matus had made her promise to keep to herself until the time was right, a trump card to be used only when there was no other way out. She added in a dramatic whisper that the Nagwal had foreseen their new living arrangement, which was the result of my taking Josefina to Tula to be with Pablito. She said that there was a faint chance that we might succeed as a group if we followed the natural order of that organization. Lagorda explained that since we were divided into couples, we formed a living organism. We were a snake, a rattlesnake. The snake had 4 sections and was divided into 2 longitudinal halves, male and female. She said that she and I made up the first section of the snake, the head. It was a cold, calculating, poisonous head. The second section, formed by Nestor and Lydia, was the firm and fair heart of the snake. The third was the belly, a shifty, moody, untrustworthy belly made up by Pablito and Josefina. And the fourth section, the tail, where the rattle was located, was formed by the couple who in real life could rattle on in their tzotzil language for hours on end, Benigno and Rosa. Lagorda straightened herself up from the position she had adopted to whisper in my ear. She smiled at me and patted me on the back. Eligio said one word that finally came back to me, she went on. Josefina agrees with me that he said the word trail over and over. We are going to go on a trail. Without giving me a chance to ask her any questions, she said that she was going to sleep for a while and then assemble everyone to go on a trip. We started out before midnight, hiking in bright moonlight. Every one of the others had been reluctant to go at first, but Lagorda very skillfully sketched out for them Don Juan's alleged description of the snake. Before we started, Lydia suggested that we provide ourselves with supplies in case the trip turned out to be a long one. Lagorda dismissed her suggestion on the grounds that we had no idea about the nature of the trip. She said that the Nagwal Juan Matus had once pointed out to her the beginning of a pathway and said that at the right opportunity we should place ourselves on that spot and let the power of the trail reveal itself to us. Lagorda added that it was not an ordinary goat's path, but a natural line on the earth which the Nagwal had said would give us strength and knowledge if we could follow it and become one with it. We moved under mixed leadership. Lagorda supplied the impetus, and Nestor knew the actual terrain. She led us to a place in the mountains. Nestor took over then and located a pathway. Our formation was evident, the head taking the lead and the others arranging themselves according to the anatomical model of a snake. Heart, intestines, and tail. The men were to the right of the women. Each couple was 5 feet behind the one in front of them. We hiked as quickly and as quietly as we could. There were dogs barking for a time. As we got higher into the mountains, there was only the sound of crickets. We walked for a long while. All of a sudden Lagorda stopped and grabbed my arm. She pointed ahead of us. 20 or 30 yards away, right in the middle of the trail, there was the bulky silhouette of an enormous man over 7 feet tall. He was blocking our way. We grouped together in a tight bunch. Our eyes were fixed on the dark shape. He did not move. After a while, Nestor alone advanced a few steps toward him. Only then did the figure move. He came toward us. Gigantic as he was, he moved nimbly. Nestor came back running. The moment he joined us, the man stopped. Boldly, Lagorda took a step toward him. The man took a step toward us. It was evident that if we kept on moving forward, we were going to clash with the giant. We were no match for whatever it was. Without waiting to prove it, I took the initiative and pulled everyone back and quickly steered them away from that place. We walked back to Lagorda's house in total silence. It took us hours to get there. We were utterly exhausted. When we were safely sitting in her room, Lagorda spoke. "We are doomed," she said to me. "You didn't want us to move on. That thing we saw on the trail was one of your allies, wasn't it? They come out of their hiding place when you pull them out." I did not answer. There was no point in protesting. I remembered the countless times I had believed that Don Juan and Don Gennaro were in cahoots with each other. I thought that while Don Juan talked to me in the darkness, Don Gennaro would put on a disguise in order to scare me. Don Juan would insist that it was an ally. The idea that there were allies or entities at large that escape our everyday attention had been too far-fetched for me. But then I had lived to find out that the allies of Don Juan's description existed in fact. There were, as he had said, entities at large in the world. In an authoritarian outburst, rare to me in my everyday life, I stood up and told Lagorda and the rest of them that I had a proposition for them, and they could take it or leave it. If they were ready to move out of there, I was willing to take the responsibility of taking them somewhere else. If they were not ready, I would feel exonerated, freed from any question of guilt from any further commitment to them. I felt a surge of optimism and certainty. None of them said anything. They looked at me silently, as if they were internally assessing my statements. "How long would it take you to get your gear?" I asked. "We have no gear," Lagorda said. "We'll go as we are. And we can go right this minute if it is necessary. But if we can wait 3 more days, everything will be better for us." "What about the houses that you have?" I asked. "Soledad will take care of that," she said. That was the first time Doña Soledad's name had been mentioned since I last saw her. I was so intrigued that I momentarily forgot the drama of the moment. I sat down. Lagorda was hesitant to answer my questions about Doña Soledad. Nestor took over and said that Doña Soledad was around, but that none of them knew much about her activities. She came and went without giving anyone notice, the agreement between them being that they would look after her house and vice versa. Doña Soledad knew that they had to leave sooner or later, and she would assume the responsibility of doing whatever was necessary to dispose of their property. "How will you let her know?" I asked. "That's La Gorda's department," Nestor said. "We don't know where she is." "Where is Doña Soledad, Gorda?" I asked. "How in the hell would I know?" La Gorda snapped at me. "But you're the one who calls her," Nestor said. La Gorda looked at me. It was a casual look, yet it gave me a shiver. I recognized that look, but from where? The depths of my body stirred. My solar plexus had a solidity I had never felt before. My diaphragm seemed to be pushing up on its own. I was pondering whether I should lie down when suddenly I found myself standing. "La Gorda doesn't know," I said. "Only I know where she is." Everyone was shocked. I perhaps more than anyone else. I had made the statement with no rational foundation whatsoever. At the moment I was voicing it, nevertheless, I had had the perfect conviction that I knew where she was. It was like a flash that crossed my consciousness. I saw a mountainous area with very rugged, arid peaks, a scraggy terrain, desolate and cold. As soon as I had spoken, my next conscious thought was that I must have seen that landscape in a movie, and that the pressure of being with these people was causing me to have a breakdown. I apologized to them for mystifying them in such a blatant although unintentional manner. I sat down again. "You mean you don't know why you said that?" Nestor asked me. He had chosen his words carefully. The natural thing to say, at least for me, would have been, "So you really don't know where she is?" I told them that something unknown had come upon me. I described the terrain I had seen, and the certainty I had had that Doña Soledad was there. "That happens to us quite often," Nestor said. I turned to La Gorda and she nodded her head. I asked for an explanation. "These crazy mixed-up things keep coming to our minds," La Gorda said. "Ask Lydia, or Rosa, or Josefina." Since they had entered into their new living arrangement, Lydia, Rosa, and Josefina had not said much to me. They had confined themselves to greetings and casual comments about food or the weather. Lydia avoided my eyes. She mumbled that she thought at times that she remembered other things. "Sometimes I can really hate you," she said to me. "I think you are pretending to be stupid. Then I remember that you were very ill because of us." "Was it you?" "Of course it was him," Rosa said. "I too remember things. I remember a lady who was kind to me. She taught me how to keep myself clean, and this nag will cut my hair for the first time, while the lady held me because I was scared. That lady loved me. She hugged me all the time. She was very tall. I remember my face was on her bosom when she used to hug me. She was the only person who ever cared for me. I would have gladly gone to my death for her." "Who was that lady, Rosa?" La Gorda asked with bated breath. Rosa pointed to me with a movement of her chin, a gesture heavy with dejection and contempt. "He knows," she said. All of them stared at me, waiting for an answer. I became angry and yelled at Rosa that she had no business making statements that were really accusations. I was not in any way lying to them. Rosa was not flustered by my outburst. She calmly explained that she remembered the lady telling her that I would come back someday, after I had recovered from my illness. Rosa understood that the lady was taking care of me, nursing me back to health. Therefore, I had to know who she was and where she was since I seemed to have recovered. "What kind of illness did I have, Rosa?" I asked. "You got ill because you couldn't hold your world," she said with utter conviction. "Someone told me, I think a very long time ago, that you were not made for us, just like Eligio told Lagorda in Dreaming. You left us because of it, and Lydia never forgave you. She'll hate you beyond this world." Lydia protested that her feelings for me had nothing to do with what Rosa was saying. She was merely short-tempered and easily got angry at my stupidities. I asked Josefina if she also remembered me. "I sure do," she said with a grin. "But you know me, I'm crazy. You can't trust me. I'm not dependable." Lagorda insisted on hearing what Josefina remembered. Josefina was set not to say anything, and they argued back and forth. Finally Josefina spoke to me. "What's the use of all this talk about remembering? It's just talk," she said. "And it isn't worth a fig." Josefina seemed to have scored a point with all of us. There was no more to be said. They were getting up to leave after having sat in polite silence for a few minutes. "I remember you bought me beautiful clothes," Josefina suddenly said to me. "Don't you remember when I fell down the stairs in one store? I nearly broke my leg and you had to carry me out." Everybody sat down again and kept their eyes fixed on Josefina. "I also remember a crazy woman," she went on. "She wanted to beat me and used to chase me all over the place until you got angry and stopped her." I felt exasperated. Everyone seemed to be hanging on Josefina's words when she herself had told us not to trust her because she was crazy. She was right. Her remembering was sheer aberration condition markedly different from the norm to me. "I know why you got ill, too," she went on. "I was there. But I can't remember where. They took you beyond that wall of fog to find this stupid Gorda. I suppose she must have gotten lost. You couldn't make it back. When they brought you out you were almost dead." The silence that followed her revelations was oppressive. I was afraid to ask anything. "I can't remember why on earth she went in there, or who brought you back," Josefina continued. "I do remember that you were ill and didn't recognize me anymore. This stupid Gorda swears that she didn't know you when you first came to this house a few months ago. I knew you right away. I remembered you were the Nagual that got ill. You want to know something? I think these women are just indulging. And so are the men, especially that stupid Pablito. They've got to remember, they were there, too." "Can you remember where we were?" I asked. "No. I can't," Josefina said. "I'll know it if you take me there, though. When we all were there, they used to call us the drunkards because we were groggy. I was the least dizzy of all, so I remember pretty well." "Who called us drunkards?" I asked. "Not you, just us," Josefina replied. "I don't know who. The Nagual Juan made us, I suppose." I looked at them and each one of them avoided my eyes. "We are coming to the end," Nestor muttered, as if talking to himself. "Our ending is staring us in the eye." He seemed to be on the verge of tears. "I should be glad and proud that we have arrived at the end," he went on. "Yet I'm sad." "Can you explain that, Nagual?" Suddenly all of them were sad. Even defiant Lydia was sad. "What's wrong with all of you?" I asked in a convivial tone. "What ending are you talking about?" I think everyone knows what ending it is, Nestor said. Lately, I've been having strange feelings. Something is calling us. And we don't let go as we should. We cling. Pablito had a true moment of gallantry and said that Lagorda was the only one among them who did not cling to anything. The rest of them, he assured me, were nearly hopeless egotists. The Nagual Juan made us said that when it's time to go, we will have a sign, Nestor said. Something we truly like will come forth and take us. He said it doesn't have to be something great, Benigno added. Anything we like will do. For me the sign will come in the form of the lead soldiers I never had, Nestor said to me. A row of hussars on horseback will come to take me. What will it be for you? I remembered Don Juan telling me once that death might be behind anything imaginable, even behind a dot on my writing pad. He gave me then the definitive metaphor of my death. I had told him that once while walking on Hollywood Boulevard in Los Angeles I had heard the sound of a trumpet playing an old idiotic popular tune. The music was coming from a record shop across the street. Never had I heard a more beautiful sound. I became enraptured by it. I had to sit down on the curb. The limpid brass sound of that trumpet was going directly to my brain. I felt it just above my right temple. It soothed me until I was drunk with it. When it concluded, I knew that there would be no way of ever repeating that experience, and I had enough detachment not to rush into the store and buy the record and a stereo set to play it on. Don Juan said that it had been a sign given to me by the powers that rule the destiny of men. When the time comes for me to leave the world, in whatever form, I will hear the same sound of that trumpet, the same idiotic tune, the same peerless trumpeter. The next day was a frantic day for them. They seemed to have endless things to do. Lagorda said that all their chores were personal and had to be performed by each one of them without any help. I welcomed being alone. I too had things to work out. I drove to the nearby town that had disturbed me so thoroughly. I went directly to the house that had held such fascination for Lagorda and me. I knocked on the door. A lady answered. I made up a story that I had lived in that house as a child and wanted to look at it again. She was a very gracious woman. She let me go through the house, apologizing profusely for a non-existent disorder. There was a wealth of hidden memories in that house. They were there, and I could feel them, but I could not remember anything. The following day Lagorda left at dawn. I expected her to be gone all day, but she came back at noon. She seemed very upset. Soledad has come back and wants to see you, she said flatly. Without any word of explanation, she took me to Doña Soledad's house. Doña Soledad was standing by the door. She looked younger and stronger than the last time I had seen her. She bore only the slightest resemblance to the lady I had known years before. Lagorda seemed to be on the verge of crying. The tension we were going through made her mood perfectly understandable to me. She left without saying a word. Doña Soledad said that she had only a little time to talk to me and that she was going to use every minute of it. She was strangely deferential. Deferential, showing courteous regard for people's feelings. There was a tone of politeness in every word she said. I made a gesture to interrupt her to ask a question. I wanted to know where she had been. She rebuffed me in a most delicate manner. She said that she had chosen her words carefully and that the lack of time would permit her only to say what was essential. She peered into my eyes for a moment that seemed unnaturally long. That annoyed me. She could have talked to me and answered some questions in the same length of time. She broke her silence and spoke what I thought were absurdities. She said that she had attacked me as I had requested her to, the day we crossed the parallel lines for the first time, and that she only hoped her attack had been effective and served its purpose. I wanted to shout that I had never asked her to do anything of the sort. I did not know about parallel lines, and what she was saying was nonsense. She pressed my lips with her hand. I recoiled automatically. She seemed sad. She said that there was no way for us to talk because at that moment we were on two parallel lines, and neither of us had the energy to cross over. Only her eyes could tell me her mood. For no reason, I began to feel relaxed. Something inside me felt at ease. I noticed that tears were rolling down my cheeks. And then a most incredible sensation took possession of me for a moment, a short moment, but long enough to jolt the foundations of my consciousness, or of my person, or of what I think and feel as myself. During that brief moment I knew that we were very close to each other in purpose and temperament. Our circumstances were alike. I wanted to acknowledge to her that it had been an arduous struggle, but the struggle was not over yet. It would never be over. She was saying goodbye because, being the impeccable warrior she was, she knew that our paths would never cross again. We had come to the end of a trail. A lost wave of affiliation, of kinship, burst out from some unimaginable dark corner of myself. That flash was like an electric charge in my body. I embraced her. My mouth was moving, saying things that had no meaning to me. Her eyes lit up. She was also saying something I could not understand. The only sensation that was clear to me, that I had crossed the parallel lines, had no pragmatic significance. There was a welled-up anguish inside me pushing outward. Some inexplicable force was splitting me apart. I could not breathe and everything went black. I felt someone moving me, shaking me gently. Lagorda's face came into focus. I was lying in Doña Soledad's bed, and Lagorda was sitting by my side. We were alone. "Where is she?" I asked. "She's gone," Lagorda replied. I wanted to tell Lagorda everything. She stopped me. She opened the door. All the apprentices were outside waiting for me. They had put on their raunchiest clothes. Lagorda explained that they had torn up everything they had. It was late afternoon. I had been asleep for hours. Without talking, we walked to Lagorda's house, where I had my car parked. They crammed inside like children going on a Sunday drive. Before I got into the car, I stood gazing at the valley. My body rotated slowly and made a complete circle, as if it had a volition and purpose of its own. I felt I was capturing the essence of that place. I wanted to keep it with me because I knew unequivocally that never in this life would I see it again. The others must have done that already. They were free of melancholy. They were laughing, teasing one another. I started the car and drove away. When we reached the last bend in the road, the sun was setting, and Lagorda yelled at me to stop. She got out and ran to a small hill at the side of the road. She climbed it and took a last look at her valley. She extended her arms toward it and breathed it in. The ride down those mountains was strangely short and thoroughly uneventful. Everybody was quiet. I tried to get Lagorda into a conversation, but she flatly refused. She said that the mountains, being possessive, claimed ownership of them, and that if they did not save their energy, the mountains would never let them go. Once we got to the lowlands they became more animated, especially Lagorda. She seemed to be bubbling with energy. She even volunteered information without any coaxing on my part. One of her statements was that the Nagual Juan Matus had told her, and Soledad had confirmed, that there was another side to us. Upon hearing it, the rest of them joined in with questions and comments. They were baffled by their strange memories of events that could not logically have taken place. Since some of them had first met me only months before, remembering me in the remote past was something beyond the bounds of their reason. I told them then about my meeting with Doña Soledad. I described my feeling of having known her intimately before, and my sense of having unmistakably crossed what she called the parallel lines. They reacted with confusion to my statement. It seemed that they had heard the term before, but I was not sure they all understood what it meant. For me it was a metaphor. I could not vouch that it was the same for them. When we were coming into the city of Oaxaca, they expressed a desire to visit the place where Lagorda had said Don Juan and Don Genaro disappeared. I drove directly to the spot. They rushed out of the car and seemed to be orienting themselves, sniffing at something, looking for clues. Lagorda pointed in the direction she thought they had gone. "You've made a terrible mistake, Gorda," Nestor said loudly. "That's not the east, that's the north." Lagorda protested and defended her opinion. The women backed her, and so did Pablito. Benigno was noncommittal. He kept on looking at me as if I were going to furnish the answer, which I did. I referred to a map of the city of Oaxaca that I had in the car. The direction Lagorda was pointing was indeed north. Nestor remarked that he had felt all along that their departure from their town was not premature or forced in any way. The timing was right. The others had not, and their hesitation arose from Lagorda's misjudgment. They had believed, as she herself had, that the Nagual had pointed toward their hometown, meaning that they had to stay put. I admitted, as an afterthought, that in the final analysis I was the one to blame because, although I had had the map, I had failed to use it at the time. I then mentioned that I had forgotten to tell them that one of the men, the one I had thought for a moment was Don Genaro, had beckoned us with a movement of his head. Lagorda's eyes widened with genuine surprise, or even alarm. She had not detected the gesture, she said. The beckoning had been only for me. "That's it," Nestor exclaimed. "Our fates are sealed." He turned to address the others. All of them were talking at once. He made frantic gestures with his hands to calm them. "I only hope that all of you did whatever you had to do as if you were never coming back," he said. "Because we are never going back." "Are you telling us the truth?" Lydia asked me with a fierce look in her eyes, as the others peered expectantly at me. I assured them that I had no reason to make it up. The fact that I saw that man gesturing to me with his head had no significance whatsoever for me. Besides, I was not even convinced that those men were Don Juan and Don Genaro. "You're very crafty," Lydia said. "You may just be telling us this so that we will follow you meekly." "Now, wait a minute," Lagorda said. "This Nagual may be as crafty as you like, but he'd never do anything like that." They all began talking at once. I tried to mediate and had to shout over their voices that what I had seen did not make any difference anyway. Nestor very politely explained that Genaro had told them that when the time came for them to leave their valley, he would somehow let them know with a movement of his head. They quieted down when I said that if their fates were sealed by that event, So was mine. All of us were going north. Nestor then led us to a place of lodging, a boarding house where he stayed when doing business in the city. Their spirits were high, in fact too high for my comfort. Even Lydia embraced me, apologizing for being so difficult. She explained that she had believed Lagorda and therefore had not bothered to cut her ties effectively. Josefina and Rosa were ebullient to bullion, joyously unrestrained, and patted me on the back over and over. I wanted to talk with Lagorda. I needed to discuss our course of action. But there was no way to be alone with her that night. Nestor, Pablito, and Benigno left in the early morning to do some errands. Lydia, Rosa, and Josefina also went out to go shopping. Lagorda requested that I help her buy her new clothes. She wanted me to pick out one dress for her, the perfect one to give her the self-confidence she needed to be a fluid warrior. I not only found a dress but an entire outfit, shoes, nylons, and lingerie. I took her for a stroll. We meandered in the center of town like two tourists, staring at the Indians in their regional garments. Being a formless warrior, she was already perfectly at ease in her elegant outfit. She looked ravishing. It was as if she had never dressed any other way. It was I who could not get used to it. The questions that I wanted to ask Lagorda, which should have poured out of me, were impossible to formulate. I had no idea what to ask her. I told her in true seriousness that her new appearance was affecting me. Very soberly, she said that the crossing of boundaries was what had affected me. We crossed some boundaries last night, she said. Soledad told me what to expect, so I was prepared. But you were not. She began to explain softly and slowly that we had crossed some boundaries of affection the night before. She was enunciating every syllable as if she were talking to a child or a foreigner. But I could not concentrate. We went back to our lodgings. I needed to rest, yet I ended up going out again. Lydia, Rosa, and Josefina had not been able to find anything and wanted something like Lagorda's outfit. By mid-afternoon I was back in the boarding house admiring the little sisters. Rosa had difficulty walking with high-heeled shoes. We were joking about her feet when the door opened slowly and Nestor made a dramatic entrance. He was wearing a tailored dark blue suit, light pink shirt, and blue necktie. His hair was neatly combed and a bit fluffy, as if it had been blown dry. He looked at the women and the women looked at him. Pablito came in, followed by Benigno. Both were dashing. Their shoes were brand new, and their suits looked custom-made. I could not get over everyone's adaptation to city clothes. They reminded me so much of Don Juan. I was perhaps as shocked seeing the three generos in city clothes as I had been when I saw Don Juan wearing a suit, yet I accepted their change instantly. On the other hand, while I was not surprised at the women's transformation, for some reason I could not get accustomed to it. I thought that the generos must have had a streak of sorcerer's luck in order to find such perfect fits. They laughed when they heard me raving about their luck. Nestor said that a tailor had made their suits months before. We each have another suit, he said to me. We even have leather suitcases. We knew our time in these mountains was up. We are ready to go. Of course, you first have to tell us where. And also how long we are going to stay here. He explained that he had old business accounts he had to close and needed time. Lagorda stepped in and with great certainty and authority, stated that that night we were going to go as far away as power permitted. Consequently, they had until the end of the day to settle their business. Nestor and Pablito hesitated by the door. They looked at me, waiting for confirmation. I thought the least I could do was to be honest with them, but Lagorda interrupted me, just as I was about to say that I was in limbo as to what exactly we were going to do. "We will meet at the Nagual's bench at dusk," she said. "We'll leave from there. We should do whatever we have to or want to until then, knowing that never again in this life will we be back." Lagorda and I were alone after everybody left. In an abrupt and clumsy movement, she sat on my lap. She was so light I could make her thin body shake by contracting the muscles of my calves. Her hair had a peculiar perfume. I joked that the smell was unbearable. She was laughing and shaking when out of nowhere a feeling came to me, a memory. All of a sudden I had another Gorda on my lap, fat, twice the size of the Gorda I knew. Her face was round and I was teasing her about the perfume in her hair. I had the sensation that I was taking care of her. The impact of that spurious plausible but false memory made me stand up. Lagorda fell noisily to the floor. I described what I had remembered. I told her that I had seen her as a fat woman only once, and so briefly that I had no idea of her features, and yet I had just had a vision of her face when she was fat. She did not make any comments. She took off her clothes and put on her old dress again. "I am not yet ready for it," she said, pointing at her new outfit. "We still have one more thing to do before we are free." According to the Nagual Juan made us instructions, all of us must sit together on a power spot of his choice. "Where's that spot?" "Somewhere in the mountains around here. It's like a door." The Nagual told me that there was a natural crack on that spot. He said that certain power spots are holes in this world. If you are formless, you can go through one of those holes into the unknown, into another world. That world and this world we live in are on two parallel lines. Chances are that all of us have been taken across those lines at one time or another, but we don't remember. Eligio is in that other world. Sometimes we reach it through dreaming. Josefina, of course, is the best dreamer among us. She crosses those lines every day, but being crazy makes her indifferent, even dumb, so Eligio helped me to cross those lines, thinking I was more intelligent, and I turned out to be just as dumb. Eligio wants us to remember our left side. Soledad told me that the left side is the parallel line to the one we are living in now. So if he wants us to remember it, we must have been there. And not in dreaming, either. That's why all of us remember weird things now and then. Her conclusions were logical given the premises she was working with. I knew what she was talking about. Those occasional unsolicited memories reeked of the reality of everyday life, and yet we could find no time sequence for them, no opening in the continuum of our lives where we could fit them. Lagorda reclined on the bed. There was a worried look in her eyes. "What bothers me is what to do to find that power spot," she said. "Without it there is no possible journey for us. What worries me is where I'm going to take all of you and what I'm going to do with you," I said. "Soledad told me that we will go as far north as the border," Lagorda said. "Some of us even further north perhaps. But you won't go all the way through with us. You have another fate." Lagorda was pensive, persistently or morbidly thoughtful for a moment. She frowned with the apparent effort of arranging her thoughts. "Soledad said that you will take me to fulfill my destiny," Lagorda said. "I am the only one of us who is in your charge. Alarm must have been written all over my face. She smiled. Soledad also told me that you are plugged up, Lagorta went on. You have moments, though, when you are in agile. The rest of the time, Soledad says, you are like a crazy man who is lucid, transparently clear in language only for a few moments, and then reverts back to his madness. Doña Soledad had used an appropriate image to describe me, one I could understand. I must have had a moment of lucidity for her when I knew I had crossed the parallel lines. That same moment, by my standards, was the most incongruous of all. Doña Soledad and I were certainly on two different lines of thought. What else did she tell you? I asked. She told me I should force myself to remember, Lagorta said. She exhausted herself trying to bring out my memory. That was why she couldn't deal with you. Lagorta got up. She was ready to leave. I took her for a walk around the city. She seemed very happy. She went from place to place watching everything, feasting her eyes on the world. Don Juan had given me that image. He had said that a warrior knows that he is waiting, and knows also what he is waiting for, and while he waits, he feasts his eyes on the world. For him, the ultimate accomplishment of a warrior was joy. That day in Oaxaca, Lagorta was following Don Juan's teachings to the letter. In the late afternoon before dusk, we sat down on Don Juan's bench. Benigno, Pablito, and Josefina showed up first. After a few minutes, the other three joined us. Pablito sat down between Josefina and Lydia and put his arms around them. They had changed back into their old clothes. Lagorta stood up and began to tell them about the power spot. Nestor laughed at her, and the rest of them joined him. Never again will you get us to fall for your bossiness, Nestor said. We are free of you. We crossed the boundaries last night. Lagorta was unruffled, but the others were angry. I had to intervene. I said loudly that I wanted to know more about the boundaries we had crossed the night before. Nestor explained that that pertained only to them. Lagorta disagreed. They seemed to be on the verge of fighting. I pulled Nestor to the side and ordered him to tell me about the boundaries. Our feelings make boundaries around anything, he said. The more we love, the stronger the boundary is. In this case, we loved our home. Before we left it, we had to lift up our feelings. Our feelings for our home went up to the top of the mountains to the west from our valley. That was the boundary, and when we crossed the top of those mountains, knowing that we'll never be back, we broke it. But I also knew that I'd never be back, I said. You didn't love those mountains the way we did, Nestor replied. That remains to be seen, Lagorta said cryptically. We were under her influence, Pablito said, standing up and pointing to Lagorta. She had us by the napes of our necks. Now I see how stupid we've been on account of her. We can't cry over spilled milk, but we'll never fall for it again. Lydia and Josefina joined Nestor and Pablito. Benigno and Rosa looked on as if the struggle did not concern them anymore. I had right then another moment of certainty and authoritarian behavior. I stood up and, without any conscious volition, announced that I was taking charge and that I relieved Lagorta of any further obligation to make comments or to present her ideas as the only solution. When I finished talking, I was shocked at my boldness. Everyone, including Lagorta, was delighted. The force behind my explosion had been first a physical sensation that my sinuses were opening, and second the certainty that I knew what Don Juan had meant, And exactly where the place was that we had to visit before we could be free. As my sinuses opened, I had had a vision of the house that had intrigued me. I told them where we had to go. They accepted my directions without any arguments or even comments. We checked out of the boarding house and went to eat dinner. Afterward, we strolled around the plaza until about 11 o'clock. I brought the car around, they piled noisily inside, and we were off. LaGorda remained awake to keep me company while the rest of them went to sleep, and then Nestor drove while LaGorda and I slept. And that's not all. Our experts and regular viewers respond to all comments. Also check if you forgot to subscribe and set your bell to receive notifications about new audiobooks and other useful self-development materials that we release regularly. Join in the discussions, don't forget to give likes and, if possible and inspired, support the development of the channel financially. All useful links will be in the description and the first attached comment. Goodness, love and wisdom to all. And now move on to watch the next part of the video at the links below, or choose something from the playlists of the channel and those you see on the screen.